Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another coffee chat. So I'm going to sit here and drink my morning coffee. About to cook my breakfast, eat, and get my squats on, because I always squat in the morning. Yes, and for those unfamiliar with it, I squat every morning. It's what I do. So I had a subscriber ask me a couple days ago, hey, is it okay for my girlfriend to just squat and deadlift? She doesn't want a massive upper body, and squats and deadlifts seem to be what she needs for her goals. I think that's an interesting question. And for the record, that's all Brittany does right now. I have Brittany squat and deadlift. She squats about 6 days a week, and she deadlifts 3 or 4 days a week. That's all she does for her training, and a little bit of cardio. So here's the thing with that, what people need to understand, because a lot of people will go out there and say, look, all these women who are worried about getting jacked, they're worried about getting massive. They don't need to worry about that. They're not going to use anabolics. And then they will highlight some woman who is fairly well developed and show her in a bikini or something who is probably natural and just trains really hard. And what's the response that the women still give? What's the response they give? And those of us in the lifting world, we don't see it, because a lot of us might actually think a woman who lifts and is a very, very modest drug user still looks okay and attractive. Because we're around it and we appreciate hard training, we appreciate strength, muscle, things like that. A lot of us would look at a lot of these CrossFit girls and say, well, she still looks good, right? That's what a lot of us think, but to the lay person, her upper body and shoulders and delts and stuff are still too big. They don't want to see a big old vein running up a woman's bicep. Even if she has 12-inch arms, 11-inch arms, they don't want to see that. And what people need to understand when you are going to get people into training, you need to let people adjust at their own pace. They come in with a certain goal of a look that they think they want. And realistically, the look that the majority of women really want, of what they start out at least saying, hey, that's an ideal body, and then they go do a bunch of silly butt blasters and leg work and tons and tons of crunches and other nonsense. It's not going to really help them reach their goal. Could be done with just squats and deadlifts. Now, I consider those to be 2 of the most useful exercises of all time for every person. The only exception might be some athletes. A deadlift probably isn't ideal. There's a handful out there. They could replace it with power cleans and things, depending upon your sport. But those are fantastic exercises, and they are full body exercises. It just happen to be very lower body dominant, particularly the squat. But they will give some upper body development, and that has been proven repeatedly over decades with young men in the weight room. There have been plenty of coaches who've done this, who've put young men on squat only programs, and what happens? They gain an inch on their arms. Now, a more advanced lifter, you're not going to see any upper body development from these lifts. You're not going to. But a novice is going to get a little bit of development. And what does that development translate over to for women? A little bit of muscle tone in the upper body. Right? That's what it ends up being. Because when people say muscle tone, what do they mean? They think muscle tone means one thing. Those of us in the training world know that muscle tone, what people think of as a toned look, means you gain a little bit of muscle and you lose some fat. From where you started, then you looked toned. But you gained muscle. Usually looking toned requires you to gain 5 or 6 pounds of muscle mass, if not more, even for women. So those exercises will give them just a little bit of upper body development. But what it will do is develop their entire core, their legs, their butt, the things that women generally care about. And I'm not saying there's going to be women who watch this. If you watch my channel regularly and you're a woman, that's probably not good enough for you. You probably do care about being strong. You probably do want a big squat, a big bench, things like that, if you're a regular watcher and you're a woman. But to the average woman getting into training, they don't want all of that. And the layperson doesn't want to see a woman with a large upper body. They don't. They don't find it attractive. And social trends may change over time, but that is right now the reality of it. That's the real world. And if you want mainstream acceptance and you want to look good by mainstream standards, just like men have these weird ideas of what they think looks good based upon the bodybuilding and aesthetics world, you might find that's not really the ideal physique in the eyes of the average person. It really isn't. A lot of people, a perfect example, a lot of guys will look at Ziz or even Matt Ogus or whatever at contest time and say, oh, that's the ideal physique. Well, to the average person, that might even seem a little extreme. They might not think that that's the ideal physique, and that's something you need to keep in mind there. Even with the men's stuff that a lot of us think of in the training world, as you think of just the classic aesthetic physique, it's still a steroid physique, guys. That's still drugs involved, and that's still dieting down to an extreme level of body fat. It's still a steroid body. It's just that it's not massive by our mindset in the training world because we are so used to seeing so much bigger and stronger guys than this, that it's the norm in our world, and so therefore we don't think of those as extreme physiques, but to the layman they are. So take that around with women, in which there's an even bigger stigma. Women are never going to be ostracized for adding 2 inches of muscle to their butt and for adding 3 inches of muscle to their thighs and getting a little bit of visible ab and having just a nice little six-pack that's not ripped. All right, that is going to be considered, oh, that's like a bikini girl, is what they think of, right? That's what most of them will think of. The look that basically women would get from just doing a little cardio, getting as strong as they can on the squat and the deadlift, that'll work. And here's the thing, it lets them focus more on those lifts. If you get them into the mindset of squatting and deadlifting all the time as their main exercises, hey, that's all you need to do for them. They'll get away from a lot of the fluff. They'll get away from the fluff stuff, which isn't really helping them. It's not. And I know a lot of people say, well, Brett Contreras says, that's fine, guys. I don't care about his glute lab. Okay, that's gimmicky stuff. That's gimmick. The overwhelming majority of women, if they just get really strong on their squat and their deadlift, they're going to get the butt that they want within the confines of their genetics. So a focus on those exercises is going to give them efficiency in the gym. It's going to teach them a work ethic in training. And when they realize that the squat and the deadlift are not going to make their upper body really jacked, it's just going to help them in the long term have nicer legs and nicer butt and nicer abs, and they can get as strong as possible on them. That's where they'll put their efforts, and they're going to get all the other health benefits because those are big load-bearing exercises. Those are the exercises that stave off most of the health problems that women are going to have based on the research. It'll stop their osteoporosis. It'll lower their ovarian cancer rates or breast cancer rates. All this other stuff that women are worried about in the long term and should be worried about, those exercises are what's going to reduce that. That's what's going to help slow their spinal degeneration so that they don't turn into the little short grandmother and lose 4 inches, 5 inches off their height over the next 30 years. All right? It's those exercises because they load the spine, they load the hips, they load everything with adaptive stress. So that's really what they need to be pushed to do. And so it's better for their long-term health to put their focus in those. And then they can actually go in and feel like they're doing something really useful. They are actually really training at that point. You can get women more focused on the numbers and performance rather than all this fluff and everything. And those lifts are going to get them to their goals much easier. Again, for the average woman who just wants to look really in shape and be healthy, those should be her go-to exercises. The other stuff is going to be non-essential. And then once they get into training, if they decide to look at the average person thinks his ideal isn't what they want because they decide they want to train hardcore, and most of them are not going to take that stance. There'll be a few who do. They will have already built a base from the squat and deadlift. They will already have the correct mindset for training because they're used to doing big, hard exercises. They've built a foundation. They'll be able to go into whatever else they want to do from there, with whether they want to go do bikini or bodybuilding or powerlifting or whatever else. If they decide down the road to do, they will have already built the foundation and a training mindset because they're now focused on training big, heavy lifts. It's not going to be a problem for them to transition. They're already lifters in a sense. So, I think it's perfectly acceptable. And I think actually for most women getting into the gym, as far as their exercises go as resistance training, if they put all of their efforts into the squat and deadlift, I think it would actually be the fastest way for most of them to reach their goals. I'm not saying all of them, but the majority. So it's not a bad way to go, and it's perfectly acceptable for them to do that. And I would actually recommend it for a lot of you guys out there, your girlfriend, wife, whatever. Your sister wants to get a little bit into lifting and training, coming to you for advice, just teach her to squat and deadlift correctly and focus on getting as strong as possible on those two lifts. And you will get her into a very fitness-oriented lifestyle, and she's more likely to reach the goals that she has set. Not what you think in your mind as a lifter she should look like, but what she probably wants to look like when she sees a certain bikini chick or whatever else has a certain look she has in mind. swimsuit model. Those are going to be the exercises that are most likely to get her as close to the goal that she has visualized as possible within a more reasonable time frame, instead of all this other nonsense they do. So again, perfectly acceptable. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.